Welcome to the final video where we're going to look back at the days of Noah and the interplay between Noah and Enoch and Methuselah. And then we're going to look at the present day of 13th and the 14th of Chesvan, the 8th month, and a little bit ahead on the calendar. So on the 10th of Chesvan, Noah and his family, we commemorate how they entered the ark and they were set apart and delivered. God closed the ark door behind them. This meant deliverance and separation from them that would be judged outside. They took Enoch's writings with them. As the first chapter of the book of Enoch accounts, that book was reserved for the time of tribulation after the rapture. So we read in the opening statement of the book of Enoch, the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and the righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. And he took up his parable and said, Enoch, a righteous man, whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens. With the angels showed me, and from them I heard everything. And from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one which is for to come. So we understand that the book of Enoch, which was written before the days of Noah, was reserved for the time of tribulation. And the Lord told us that our departure will be in the days as were the days of Noah and Lot. So contained in the Enochian documents Noah took with him was the prophecy by Enoch of the flood itself, which would last a year and destroy the wicked, also noted in Genesis 6:8, as well as his detailed knowledge on the heavenly clock and the gospel written in the stars, Enoch 35:3. Methuselah was a restrainer type. He was outside of the ark at this time. His life of 969 years testified of the restraint of evil until the appointed time frame of judgment after his death, and the meaning of judgment after his death is embedded in his name. So, his death as such meant the closure of that time of grace and the onset of judgment and tribulation. From the book of Jasher, chapter 6, we gain understanding that people tried to break open the ark of Noah. The understanding they had that the impact of judgment would threaten their lives. They were, however, not able to do so. So these two episodes written in the scriptures and in the extra-biblical book of Jasher may be a foreshadowing that while we are in the ark, in Jesus, our safety, that our peace and sense of safety and security may be challenged by people outside of our ark. So it may be a forewarning for us to those led by the spiritual enemy wanting to force their way into our chambers, our hearts and mind, where we have peace with Christ, parallel to the foolish virgins laying claim on the wise virgin's oil, both with no avail. So when the Lord instructs us to consider the times and the days of Noah, and we're looking at the lives, especially for Noah, Enoch, and Methuselah, and what they represented, we're also invited to look at their way of calendar and timekeeping. And there is some contention about the different time calendars, but I believe that is not necessary because I've studied both the biblical calendar, which is best reflected in my perspective in Torah calendar, as well as the Enoch calendar, and both are valid and function as two harmonious witnesses of biblical time. And this is a beautiful article which details that there is no need of contention. So they both appear in a different form, function, and scope, though both calendars, so both the biblical, the Torah calendar, and the Enoch calendar, synchronize completely every 40 years. There's no contention nor difference in quality. Both are validated in scripture, celestial signs, and they help people navigate in space and prophetic time for their respective scopes. I hold the view that Torah calendar leads us most accurately to the New Testament appointed times, in line with the ordained harvest portions, ready for priestly and people's temple offerings. We're invited by the Lord to consider them and understand them, because we know that the Feast of Tabernacles and Passover will be held in the millennium. So in this linked source, you can read more about the annual barley first fruits report, which is an essential element of the biblical calendar, and it being Abib or ready, the priestly portion for the harvest was ready this year. So the 10th of Chesvan was also the birth of the prophet Gad, and that is a type of end times warriors helping the brethren to possess their portions in the promised land. So much like David's end times army portion and the man-child, the spiritual warriors coming forth from the bride, reflected in Mary Magdalene, the prophet Gad and the tribe of Gad was instructed by the Lord to help people overcome in the promised land. So Gad represents end times overcomers and warriors, including prophets and seers who are endued with the spirit of Elijah, overcoming the spirit of Jezebel, operating in the church of Thyatira. So the spirit of control, of division, operating in the spirit in the church of Thyatira, that is the final and I believe the fiercest spiritual force believers are called to overcome. And if you read in the book where Elijah overcomes Ahab and Jezebel, because they work in tandem, passively and aggressively, how he overcomes Ahab and Jezebel, it will help us to overcome that spirit operating within ourselves, in others, and especially in structures where there is hierarchy. So on the 11th of Chesvan was the death of Methuselah, the type of restrainer, the son of Enoch and grandfather of Noah. Methuselah, the longest living human being of all times, died exactly 7 days before the beginning of the flood, his name pointing to judgment being rendered after his death, and the restraint of God from judging willful sin, evil, and wickedness being lifted. So we are in the days of that judgment being lifted. It was also the day when Rachel died while giving birth to Benjamin. So she had previously already given birth to Joseph, the following years of being childless. And when she brought forth Benjamin, that came with a very high price, her own life. And our sister from Fresh Oil Releases shares, the mourning for the death of Rachel, the desire of Jacob's heart, took place in the same week as the mourning for the death of Methuselah. It is with great travail and the laying down of the lives of the bride that the sons of the right hand, Benjamin, will be brought forth, meaning the end times bridal harvesters. So today, Rachel's tomb serves as a place of pilgrimage and prayer, as it has for more than 35 centuries. It's regarded as Judaism's third holiest site. So we see in the Torah portions directed by Ezra, entitled Lech Lecha, it covers Abraham's first travails in the Promised Land and gives us insight into the consequences of him and Sarah lapsing in faith. And from October 31st today until November 4th, it actually lasts for 4 days, are the so-called Days of the Dead, celebrated by both Halloween and Samhain. We talked about that, but also by the consecutive Days of the Dead, followed by the All Souls Day. And in this set of research notes, you can read how Halloween is rooted not only in the days of Noah, the commemoration of the death of Methuselah, but also how it's connected to Luther's Reformation And it forms a transition day for Europa, the goddess overarching Europe, the prophetic type of the woman riding the beast. And the politicians of Great Britain, in their reenactment of Brexit, bridal exit, used the date of October 31st as a key marker in their so-called no-deal Brexit, and they're repeating that this year. So Chesvan 14 tomorrow, at the heliacal rising of Spica and the conjunction of Venus and Zanaya, it's the middle of the menorah day in the arc. The number 14 points to deliverance and perfect judgment. It's also the mirror of the second Passover in the second month, and it's celebrated one single day. So this event was granted by the request of the men in the time of Moses and Aaron, who had been defiled or were afar off and therefore unable to participate in Passover and disqualified, but it was outside of their will. So this second Passover formed the completion of the barley harvest first fruits people offering. So the bride is also considered first fruits. And in Hezekiah's days, we read about that in 2 Chronicles, there was a belated Passover celebrated with the entire people from the 10th to the 21st. And in the middle of their feast, on the 16th, we commemorate that manna fell from heaven for the first time. And Jesus reflects that bread of heaven. So this could be a prophetic foreshadowing of the Lord's manna coming down from heaven from Chesvan 16th onwards. So Chesvan or Mar Chesvan 15th was the death of Mattathias, who began the Maccabean revolt, and, as we said, the unbiblical feast of Jeroboam's postponed tabernacles. The Kristallnacht, the onset of the Jewish persecution and ultimately the Holocaust, started on the 16th of Mar Chesvan. And of course, on the 17th of Chesvan was the beginning of the Great Flood, the onset of judgment. But a beautiful picture which counters that is the finishing of the temple completed by King Solomon. And on Chesvan 17 also, when David found out that King Saul and the 7 members of his family weren't buried following their fall in battle, he made haste to bring them to Israel and to give them great honor and respect. So we see how David treated the enemies who were out for his life with due respect based on the anointing of God of Saul and his relatives. So I think for today this is enough, but the notes will continue until the end of Chesvan. So I made an overview till the end of this month and even continuing into the next month. So there's an overview of the month of Kislev as well. And this is the final picture where I'd like to end with, because I believe that if we look at the harvest, there is like a concluding prophetic picture for us. So in the second month, there was the end of the spring barley harvest. And in the third month, the wheat harvest, the spring wheat harvest begins. And we just shared how on November 1st, after the heliacal rising of Spica, was actually the onset of planting of these particular crops. And if we then realize that the second month is a mirror of the 8th month, and we know that in the second month the barley harvest was finished, I think we can draw some meaning from that finishing of the barley as the first crop to be finished in the 8th month. So thank you for being with me until the 4th video. If you have the time, please consider listening to this beautiful song entitled Arise My Love. And I hope you've enjoyed the videos, and I would really love to read your comments or feedback or questions or things you see or hear differently or understand differently. And I'm greatly blessed with your support and your encouragement and insight. So I see this as a conjoined effort to find the Lord and to look towards his coming. So much love and many blessings. See you in the